In this module, we'll discuss the hardware and software requirements to install the Oracle software, the operating system prerequisites, and lastly, we'll proceed to install the database software. According to the installation guide, the database software requires a minimum of 1 GB of physical memory, but 2 GB are recommended. These values are usually well suited for small footprint applications, where only a couple tens of concurrent users are connected to the database, and the amount of transactions are not too high. Swap space requirement is to have at least 1 time the amount of physical memory. In production systems, this requirement may be hard to follow and may be unnecessary as well. For example, if you have a server with 32 GB of RAM, you may want to have the swap created no larger than 16 GB, as it will be unlikely that the memory will be totally consumed. Still, you should monitor the resources and make appropriate adjustments in case the server starts consuming swap space. You will never want your server to swap. In regards to disk space, the initial software installation requires approximately 8 GB of disk space, but once the database is running, the database will produce logs, trace files, incident files, core dumps, etc. Those consume disk space. In addition to this, whenever you patch the database software, a copy of a pre-patched version of the software is saved for rollback, thus consuming additional disk space. Similar to memory and swap space, disk space is a resource that should be kept under constant monitoring to make sure it will not run out of space, impacting this way the operation of the database. It is not uncommon at all to see database servers with more than 100 GB of memory, database sizes in the order of a couple terabytes of data, and with few thousand sessions doing transactions against the database. Databases with such characteristics are called VLDB, very large databases, and usually require advanced techniques to manage those databases. Our lab was built with Oracle Linux. Oracle has added functionality to Oracle Linux to automate most of the Linux software and configuration requirements, requiring minimal human intervention. To elaborate more on this, Oracle Linux automates the download and installation of required Linux packages. It creates the software owner, configures the Linux kernel, and sets the resource limits to meet and exceed Oracle database software requirements. This is the process I'll be showcasing in this module. If you are installing Oracle database on a different Linux distribution, you have to manually do all these steps I just described that Oracle Linux does for you. If you want to read the installation guide, which is highly recommended, you can follow the URL listed in the screen. In that link, you'll find the installation guides for Linux, Windows, HPOX, Solaris, and AAX. Let's see how to install the database software. Okay, so let's go back to the virtual machine. Let's open a new terminal, applications terminal. Let's check the space, the free space we have on this system. We have 21 GB available on the root file system. That should suffice for the installation and probably just to create a basic database, a small database on this system. Okay, let's install the Oracle Linux package. Okay, so for this, let's do sudo yum search Oracle. This will search the yum database for any package called Oracle. Let's enter the password. And here we see that we have the Oracle 12c release 2 package, but if you have a prior version, there is one for 11g or 12c release 1. There are other packages such as the Oracle ASM that will not be covered on this module training, but you can expect this on a different course. Okay, so let's proceed to install the 12c release 2. For this, we do again a sudo yum install we copy what we have selected and then paste with the right click. Okay, once it has identified the dependencies, it is okay to proceed. Yes. So all the prerequisites are complete now. There is another user called Oracle. You can see this. This is a newly created user. There are some groups added. On this installation, or install, DBA, Oper, backup DBA, etc. And Oracle belongs to all these groups by default. Okay, now let's prepare the space, the file system where we're going to install Oracle. For this, let's create a U01 directory. This will be created on the root file system. And then let's change ownership to Oracle DBA /U01. So now, if we look into this directory, we can see that now it's owned by Oracle with the group DBA. Before we proceed with the installation of database software, I would like to fix or do something before we move into that, and that is to grant read and write access to the share folders directory. And I will explain why in a minute. So right now, if I try to access this downloads directory, share folder, this is one directory, if you can remember, this is one directory that I share from my computer to the VMs. Right now, if I want to open this directory, I will get an error that I do not have the permissions necessary to read the contents of this directory. And the reason why is that my account do not belong to the bbox SF group. This group is currently empty. You can see that there are no accounts listed on this group. So in order to fix this, we need to add users to this group, and that is done with the usermod command. Let's see first what are my groups. So my primary group is 1000 or A Cortinas, and my secondary groups are A Cortinas and wheel. Let's modify this, my account, usermod. Then my primary group is A Cortinas. My secondary groups are A Cortinas, wheel, and bbox SF. And the last parameter for this command is the user ID. So let's review. I'm gonna sudo to this account to root. Root will execute the usermod command. The first parameter is -g, that is the primary group. The minus uppercase G, that is the secondary groups. You can list all the different groups that you want to add to this user, and the last parameter is the actual account you want to add this. Enter the password, and that's it. Cortinas. Now you see that my secondary group has been added to my account. Okay, if I try to open this right now, it will not work because my current session still doesn't have these permissions. So I will need to log out and log back in for this change to take effect. So let's do the same with the Oracle account. Sudo usermod -g, the primary group is oinstall. The secondary groups are oinstall, DBA, oper, backup DBA, DGDBA, KMDBA, rackDBA, and now we need to add bbox SF to Oracle. Now we have the bbox group added to this account. If we list the different groups that have the string Oracle, which is the account, you can see that there is a bbox, oinstall, DBA, the same groups. Okay, so now the last thing we need to do before we proceed with this, with the next step, is to change the password of Oracle. In order to do that, let's sudo passwd Oracle. The new password. Remember to supply a good password. So now we can proceed with the installation. So now we have assigned a password to Oracle account. Let's exit here. Let's log out. Now we have the two accounts. Let's click on the Oracle account. Enter the password. So now that we have logged in, we can double click on the downloads, and because we already belong to the bbox SF directory, we see that we can access the directory. We get no longer an error. If you haven't already done so, we need to download the software from the Oracle site. So you can connect, let me show you how to do this. So you can go to otn.oracle.com. On menu, go to Trials and Downloads. Click on Databases, and then Oracle Database. Here you need to sign in, and then accept the license, and proceed to download all the different packages. So in the case of Linux, again, you need to accept the license, you need to log in, accept the license, You will need to download at least this zip file. This contains the software to install the database. And you can see that there are other files. This is the grid home. This is for an advanced setup of the database software. This is basically for clustering of the database. Global Service Manager is related again to the clustering environment. Gateways. The gateways allows your applications to access non-Oracle databases through the gateways. So for example, if you want your application to connect to MQ server or SQL server, or that direct connectivity between your Oracle database to a SQL server database, you will use the gateways to do this. The example CD provides additional database schemas so you can test and try different functionality on your database. For example, if you want to use C language to connect to the database, the example CD provides some additional libraries for you to connect to compile C programs that can connect to the database. Last but not least, if you have an application on your Linux workstation that needs to connect to the database, it will likely require the database client to be installed on that machine in order for the application to connect to the database. So you will download the client software either in 32-bit or in 64-bit, install it on your Linux workstation so your application can connect to the database. Because I already did this, I already downloaded the zip file and I already uncompressed it on the downloads, on my downloads directory. So I already shared this with my VM. So I will skip the download section and I will go directly to the downloads. Again, I already extracted the zip file in the software that will create a database folder. And you can see all the different directories and the installer. This installer is the one that we will use to install the software. Let's do this. Let's close this, open a terminal. The share folders are mounted on the media directory. This is where you can find the SF downloads. So we are on media, SF downloads, software, database. ls-l will list all the different files on this directory, and we can see that the run installer already has the right permissions to be executed. Okay, so let's do it. The first step in the process is to provide Oracle support credentials. This step is optional. You will want to do this if you want the installer to search for database patches available for download in support sites. If there is a patch available, it could download the software for you and apply it after the installation is complete. I will skip this step for now. I'll uncheck the checkbox, then click Next. Because we didn't enter any username and password, if we want to proceed without knowing that if there is any critical security patch available, let's say yes. Now the next step is it's showing the different installation options. So this time we can create and configure a database. We can just simply install the database software, or if we are upgrading a database or we want to upgrade a database, we can do so now. I'm gonna separate the the installation and creation of the database at this point in time. I will only proceed with the installation portion of it, and in a later module I will show you how to create and configure the database. So let's click on Install Database Software Only. Now the next step is to select the type of database installation we want to perform on this server. We have basically three options. The single instance database installation, which basically is a standalone server, database server. The next one is the real application cluster, which is, as its name tells, is for when you are installing a cluster database. When you have two or more database servers sharing the same database. And the last option is the Oracle RAC 1 node database installation. This option basically is for when you are installing pretty much a standalone server, but you will want to have the option to add additional nodes to this cluster. So basically it's a cluster of one server. So let's do the single instance database installation and then click Next. The next step is to select the database edition that you want to install. You basically have two options, the Enterprise Edition and the Standard Edition. And this is not more of a question of which one I prefer, and this is more of a question of what you have licensed. If you work with your account manager, Oracle Account Manager, and you have the Enterprise Edition license, then you will select the Enterprise Edition. If you work with your account manager and you license the Standard Edition, then you have to choose the Standard Edition. So this is the difference between one or the other is just basically the Enterprise Edition contains more features related to very large databases, to partitioning options, to advanced security options, etc. For the purpose of this training, let's choose the Enterprise Edition. Now the next step is to specify the installation location. Here we have two different paths. One is the Oracle base and the other is the software location. The Oracle base is the location for the base directory of everything and anything Oracle related. As you remember, we created the U01 directory that complies with the Optimal Flexible Architecture OFA standard. This standard was created in the late 1990s, and that approach specifies all the different locations, all the different directory naming conventions for the database software. So U01 usually is for application software, U02, 03 is for database files. That is the actual database files for all the different databases that you have on this server. The software location is the path where you will install the software. And basically is composed of the Oracle base and just a series of directories. The product tells you basically that directory contains software only. There are no databases, there are nothing else, just software. The next directory is the version of the software. You can have multiple versions of the Oracle database. You can have 12.1 for release 12, release 1. You can have 11.2.0 for 11G release 2, etc. Under each version, you can have multiple DB homes, DB home 1, 2, 3, etc. Same for 12.1 and 11.2. So this provides flexibility into how many different versions of the Oracle software you can have on that server, and one database can belong to one of these different versions. So this is an important point. One database can only have one database home, but one database home can have multiple databases. because this is following the standard, let's just click next. The next step, step number 6, is to the inventory directory. The inventory directory tells what software is installed on this server. This is shared between all the different installations. The Aura inventory directory, the one here, is where every time you install a new software on this machine, it will be registered on this Aura inventory directory. So when you, in the future, when you want to know what's installed on this version, on this server, you can just check the components of the Aura inventory directory and see what's installed. By default, the group that owns this Aura inventory directory is the oInstalled group. Remember that when we run the Linux package, it created several groups. These groups are mapped to different purposes. So the DBA is the basic database administrator group. The Oper is a database operator. The backup DBA, only that group allows those users' accounts to only perform backup and recovery activities. The data guard administrative user that allows the user accounts to only do data guard, which is a replication software, data guard administrative tasks, the encryption management, and the real application cluster, that the RAC, the clustering administrator. So you can segregate the different functions of the DBA role. If you want only certain users to be able to back up the database but not perform any database administrator task, you can assign those users to the backup DBA. So this is a good approach to segregate the privileges. If you don't want to make any changes here, just click next. Now it's doing the prerequisite checks. Because we run the Linux package, everything is already set. There is nothing else for us to do. There is one important things we can do here. We can save the response file. Why this is important? Because right now we needed the console to perform the installation of this software, but we can skip the graphic component of the installation and just run what is called a silent install. The silent install doesn't require any GUI to do it. You just need a Unix terminal, connect to the database server, have all the prerequisites completed, and just use this response file to install the software. Let's do that. Let's save this response file in the default directory, the Oracle home, the Oracle directory, and let's save it as db response file. We'll review the file later. Let's click save and then proceed to install. Just click on install. This step takes several minutes to complete. I'll fast forward the installation process. Once the software is installed, we need to run a couple of scripts as root. So for this, we need to open a terminal, open tab. We cannot sudo because Oracle account is not in the sudoers file. So we need to become root. And for that, let's do su dash. And then we need to enter the root password. This was set again during the installation of Linux. So we can select, Ctrl C to copy, and then paste. Or you can manually enter the path and the script. So this changed the permissions, and now the second one, Ctrl C, right click, paste. This will install a couple of scripts that are needed to manage the database. The default path location is user local bin directory. The last thing is, well, now it's asking us if we want to set up the trace file analyzer. This trace file analyzer is a tool that allows us, as an administrator, to see what was going on with the database when an error happened. So usually when something went wrong with the database, it produces a trace file. Or you can manually start tracing a database session if you think that something is going wrong with that session. But still, if something is going on and you created, or the database created a trace file, the trace file analyzer will allow you to understand better what was happening when the error happened, or what triggered the error to produce that file. This is highly recommended to have it. It's very useful, and now Oracle support requires this more and more on a daily basis. Whenever something is happening on the database, they require this trace file analyzer to be uploaded to the support cases. So let's enter yes. Okay, now it's complete. So once we have run both scripts, we can go back to the configuration scripts and then click OK. The installation of the database software was successful. Now we can close this. And with this, we have just completed the installation of the database software. So far, we have described the hardware and software requirements for Oracle Database 12c. We've discussed the pre- and post-installation steps. We explained the installation process screens, the different installation options we have available, the security groups, software location, and briefly described what the trace file analyzer is used for. In the next module, we'll work on the different options we have to create a database.